Oh man, Coach is gonna work as hard today. Got a big tournament coming up. Hope everybody's pumped up and focused on his job. 'Cause if you wanna win, you gotta work as a team.
In soccer, every player's got to do his part, and all of the parts have to work together.
The entire body is an incredible team, one made up of trillions of cells. And they aren't just practicing. This is the real deal, the big time. It's the human body in action. In sports and in the human body, organization is everything. Just as a soccer team has special units, forwards, midfielders, defenders, our bodies have their own game plans. Each of us is an organism made up of organs, like our heart, lungs, and brain, that keep us alive. These organs work together to form organ systems.
What teamwork! Bones coordinate to create the skeletal system. Muscles combine forces to make the muscular system. These and many other organ systems keep the human body at the top of its game.
Organs, like the heart, are made of living tissues, each devoted to its own task. And the tissues themselves? They're made up of the body's individual team members, the cells. The smallest living parts of our bodies, cells are the very building blocks of life.
On the field, playing well is all about teamwork. Every one of us is there to help each other.
It's the same with your body. All your cells working together add up to a winning combination. There are about 10,000 million cells in your finger alone.
And although cells are microscopic, they're made up of even tinier parts that work together to keep them alive and working properly.
Okay, but where do these all-important cells come from?
From other cells, of course, for only cells can make new cells. To work properly, cells need oxygen and food.
Why? Because, just like kids, cells are alive.
Run 3 laps around the field? Ouch. Well, I guess this way we'll sure know what's out of bounds.
A soccer field is bounded by a white line that's only supposed to be crossed by players and officials. But a cell is surrounded by something called a membrane. The membrane's sort of soft and squishy, but that doesn't mean it's a pushover. Its main job is to make sure that conditions on the inside of the cell adjust to what's going on outside. Maintaining that state of balance is a process known as homeostasis. Without it, the cell will die. How does the membrane keep the cell in balance?
By being a selective barrier. The cell membrane controls what goes in and out of the cell. It lets certain molecules pass through in one of 3 ways: by diffusion, osmosis, or active transport.
Diffusion is the way very small molecules
Like oxygen,
get into the cell. It's also the way that other very small molecules
like carbon dioxide,
get out of the cell. These molecules pass right through small openings in the cell membrane.
In diffusion, substances always move from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration, sort of like making tea. At first, all the tea particles are in the bag. It's an area of high concentration. But in a matter of minutes, the tea dissolves in the water. Spreading out evenly, it flows through the bag to the area of low concentration until the tea has diffused throughout the water.
By far, the most common substance diffusing across a cell's membrane is water. Because keeping good old H2O balanced in a cell is so important, diffusion of water has its own special name: osmosis. Like all other diffused substances, water molecules move in and out of the cell, from high concentration to low concentration, by passing through tiny pores in the membrane.
How does a membrane let some molecules pass through, but not others? I've got a busybody experiment to find out. For this experiment, you'll need 2 plastic sandwich bags, which will act as our cell membrane, 2 twist ties, a bottle of iodine with a dropper, soluble potato starch and a tablespoon, some 500 milliliter beakers, a 250 milliliter graduated cylinder, some water, some masking tape, and a pen to label the beakers.
You're going to want to use goggles and gloves too. Iodine can burn your eyes. And don't forget your notebook and pen for observations.
Good! We've got everything. Now we're going to make representations of cells and the fluids they float around in. First, you need to make the solutions. Label one of your beakers 1 and pour in 250 milliliters of water. Then add 20 drops of iodine to it. Next, you're going to make a cell to float around in your iodine solution. Take another beaker filled with 500 milliliters of water and stir in 1 spoonful of potato starch. Stir it really well so the starch dissolves in the water. Pour half of this solution into one of the plastic bags and fasten it good and tight with the twist tie. Be sure to rinse off any starchy water that splashed on the outside of the bag. Now, put the bag, your starch cell, in the beaker labeled 1.
The plastic bag represents the cell membrane and all the cell parts inside it. The solution the bag is placed in represents the fluids that cells float in. Take a good look at your beautiful creation and write down what you see in your notebook.
Think the iodine will leak out, or the potato starch will get in? Okay, now take a break and let your cells sit for a while. Give it at least an hour before you come back to see the results. Check out your plastic bag cell. The potato starch inside turned purpley black. Cool, huh? Obviously something changed.
Here's what happened. When iodine interacts with potato starch, it turns a dark blue-black color, like we see in the bag. So we can conclude that iodine passed through our cell's plastic bag membrane.
But the water outside the bag hasn't turned dark, so potato starch must not have passed through the bag. Why doesn't it work both ways?
It's a question of size. Iodine molecules are small enough to pass through the very tiny pores in the bag. But potato starch molecules are too big to pass through the plastic bag membrane.
Now let's see if it happens in reverse. Take the beaker with your remaining starch solution, stir it up, and label it 2. Add 20 drops of iodine to another 250 milliliters of water. Pour this iodine mixture into another plastic bag and fasten it tight. After rinsing the outside of the bag, put the iodine cell in beaker number 2. Come back in about an hour and let's see what happens. Wow, look at that! The solution is purpley black, but the bag remains the same color. That must mean that the iodine in the bag leaked into the starch solution, but the starch couldn't make it through the bag, so the diffusion worked in reverse. Now you've seen that diffusion can happen in both directions. What do you think would happen if you let it sit overnight? Or if you use different substances? Or even a different kind of membrane? Using these kind of questions, you can design your own brand new diffusion experiment. So that's the key to diffusion. The cell membrane is a selective barrier. It lets some molecules pass through, but not others.
Here, the cell doesn't have to do anything to help, and so it uses no energy. But sometimes a cell must work to move molecules and uses energy in the process.
When a cell has to use energy to get the job done, it's called active transport.
In diffusion and osmosis, substances just go with the flow, passing through the membrane freely. In active transport, molecules get help from special proteins in the membrane that help them pass through.
Don't forget, even a large molecule is microscopic. It's way smaller than the tiniest speck of dust. How do we know so much about things that are so teeny?
Hold on to the history books. It's time for a body blast from the past. Today, scientists use microscopes to see even the tiniest of cells. But microscopes weren't always around. For thousands of years, nobody knew anything about the amazing world of cells, or that cells existed at all for that matter. Then, almost 400 years ago, cells were brought into focus for the first time by a new invention, the microscope. An early explorer of cells was the English scientist Robert Hooke. In 1665, he looked through a microscope he'd made himself at a thin slice of dead plant material called cork. Hooke drew what he saw, which appeared to be a bunch of little connected boxes. They reminded Hooke of small rooms, so he called them cells. These cells were fascinating, but they weren't alive. The first person to look at living cells came along a few years later. Using a simple microscope, Dutchman Anton van Leeuwenhoek recorded seeing moving creatures that he called animalcules.
Which means little animals. No, they weren't really tiny animals, but they were living cells.
Today, microscopes give us the power to peek inside the cell and discover what makes the human body tick. Once again, the secret is teamwork. Just as our bodies are made up of different kinds of cells working together like a team, a cell is also made up of different parts that work together.
No matter what its job, most cells have the same basic equipment inside. They're structures called organelles.
Adrift in a constantly moving jelly-like fluid called cytoplasm, the organelles carry out all of the processes that keep the cells, and us, alive.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the organelles. First up, it's the world's smallest highway system, the endoplasmic reticulum.
A network of thin tubes and membranes, the endoplasmic reticulum folds back and forth all through the cytoplasm. It provides pathways for various chemicals to travel to every part of the cell.
Put your hands together for the organelles that put protein together. The ribosomes!
Whether they're attached to the endoplasmic reticulum or floating freely through the cell, the ribosomes are where protein is produced. And that's important. Protein is the main ingredient for making new cells.
Here's the organelle that's got it all wrapped up, the Golgi bodies!
This organelle packs proteins and other cell products in membranes and stores them till they're either delivered to other organelles or leave the cell altogether.
Time to call in the cleanup crew, the lysosomes!
Like tiny recycling centers, the lysosomes use powerful digestive chemicals to break down large food molecules and recover worn-out cell parts.
And now, the real power behind the cell, the mighty mitochondria!
Just like we need energy to work and play, cells need energy to do their jobs. This energy comes from the mitochondria, the cell's own power stations. Using oxygen, the mitochondria burn fuel from the food we eat to power our cells in a process known as cellular respiration.
And now, ladies and gents, we direct your attention to Command Central, the nucleus, the director of all the cell's activities. This organelle is so important it comes with its very own membrane.
The nucleus is kind of like the coach, giving instructions and keeping the team working together.
Not only is the nucleus in charge of everything that goes on inside the cell, it also contains all the genetic material that makes us what we are and who we are. Chromosomes inside the nucleus hold the blueprints for making every cell in our bodies. Everything about us, our hair and eye color, how tall we are, the shape of our noses, is stored on the chromosomes in complex molecules called DNA. This vital information is passed along to every new cell.
Sometimes it seems like there are just too many players on the field, like they're multiplying.
How do cells multiply? By dividing. Division is the key to making new cells. In a process called mitosis, the chromosomes in the nucleus duplicate to be shared equally between two new cells. Like teams lining up before the start of a game, these duplicated chromosomes line up at an imaginary center line.
As if they were about to face off.
But then, they separate and migrate back to the farthest points at opposite sides of the cell.
Where the goals would be.
Right. Next, a nuclear membrane forms around each group of chromosomes. Then, the original cell pinches in two, forming two new cells. Depending on the cell, the processes of mitosis and cell division can take anywhere from a couple of hours to a few days.
In the average adult human, 25 million new cells are made every second. Cells are studied by doctors and researchers all over the world, like Dr. Wise Young, our science star.
My name is Wise Young, and I've been doing spinal cord injury research for more than 20 years. To understand that, I had to understand cells. I had to understand how they talk to each other. I had to understand how they grow, how they repair themselves, and what happens to kill them. What I do, and people like me do, is we learn about cells, and then we teach about what they do so that others can find out more. A cell is really a marvelous, marvelous thing that can talk, but using chemicals. It can touch, it can feel, it can react, it can die, and it can reproduce. They're the actual essence of what we are. We're collections of cells. Cells are different from each other, like animals and humans are different from each other. But cells are also alike in many, many ways. All cells have membranes that separate their insides from the outside. Almost all cells in our body, but not all, have nuclei or nucleuses. These contain the genetic material that make the cell what it is. All cells have some form of energy source, and a lot of it is provided by organelles that are called mitochondria. Advances in technology today have really made a lot of very difficult studies become very easy to do. Confocal microscope was designed to allow you to see something in 3 dimensions. And to do so uses a laser. And what it does is build a 3-dimensional map of a cell so you can see it as if it was a real thing rather than a flat object. There's so much science to be done. There are not enough scientists. You know, everybody can be a scientist. Scientists are just like regular people. We're curious about how things work. Science is discovery. Science is finding new knowledge. Science is learning about how things work. If you're curious, if you want to find out how things work, you're not willing to accept what somebody tells you about something, you are a scientist at heart.
Just as each player has a special job on his team, each cell plays a particular role in the body. But remember, most cells have the same basic equipment, the same organelles. The key is the instructions received from the nucleus. From bone cells to blood or brain cells, each and every cell has evolved to do a highly specific thing. Like liver cells, as part of the body's largest organ, they produce new chemicals and recycle old ones. That takes a lot of energy. So guess what liver cells are chock full of? The powerhouse organelles, mitochondria.
Some cells in the pancreas manufacture insulin to help your body deal with sugar. That requires lots of protein, so their ribosomes are working overtime. Bone cells need lots of calcium, so they have superactive Golgi bodies to package and store the calcium they need.
The main job of the red blood cells is to carry oxygen to all the other cells in the body. So specialized is its task, a red blood cell has no nucleus, making more room to store oxygen. Even the lifespan of a cell is determined by its job. Our skin is the first line of defense against disease and injury. Skin cells live only a few days before they're replaced with new cells. But brain cells, on the other hand, hold a lifetime's worth of thoughts and memories while controlling every part of our bodies. Most of them live as long as you do. So, we've learned a lot about cells. Remember, all those specialized cells work together to form tissues. Similar tissues work together to form organs. And organ systems work together to make an organism.
An organism like the human body.
Each of our cells has been duplicated from another using the same set of instructions on chromosomes inside the nucleus. Every cell is surrounded by a membrane, a selective barrier that controls what gets in and what gets out of the cell. That helps maintain the great balancing act known as homeostasis.
Floating in the jelly-like cytoplasm inside the cell are its organelles, the tiny highway system known as the endoplasmic reticulum, and the precious protein producers called ribosomes. There's the packing and storage experts, the Golgi bodies, and the ever-tidy lysosomes. The mighty mitochondria are the powerhouses. And don't forget the brains of the operation, the nucleus.
Dividing, multiplying, and specializing. Your cells have been working together as a team your entire life. That's how the human body works.
All for one and one for all. That's what I call teamwork.
That's what I call the human body in action.